in the beginning, we dua, Allahumma allimna ma yanfa'una wanfa'na bima 'allamtana. We ask Allah to give us knowledge that is beneficial, that helps us not only increases in our knowledge, but gives us conviction, increases our conviction and our yaqeen, our understanding of our faith, our understanding of the world in general, by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, history is a very tough subject, especially if most of you have come from classes, your brains are pretty much fried, and you don't want to talk about history, what's true, or what I'm going to be talking about today, the historical critical method, HCM for abbreviation purposes. It is a bit academic, so yes, I have a tough job right now. But I do appreciate all of you being here. I'm very thankful to the MSA and all of you for inviting me by the grace of Allah. Hopefully, by the grace of Allah, I'll have chances every other week to meet and discuss and share some ideas with all of you brothers and sisters, inshallah. So with that again, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So the first thing that I want to ask is, everybody here, do you know that, or did you know that we're going to be talking about history before you entered the room? Anyone that didn't know? Okay. Why'd you come? Why would you come to learn about history? Who genuinely liked history before, like in elementary or middle? Okay. Why did you come today? Anyone? Yes.
Well, for me personally, Islamic history was something that I think I talked to you about this on the phone. Islamic history for me was something that kept me close to the admiration of everything that's happened before us. And I feel as though in the past 4 or 5 years, it's something that I've kind of lost touch with. Okay. Which is why I wanted to start this class.
Okay. So what would you say you're trying to utilize this as?
An opportunity to relearn and be remotivated.
Remotivated. Okay. Anyone else? So motivation is one. Yes, Mr. Brother.
I've never actually learned a lot of Islamic history from the get-go. It's always something I've been interested in, but I've never something I pursue on my own to learn more about. So I'm excited to use this as an opportunity to just learn more.
Okay. Wonderful. Sister, if you don't mind me asking you.
I think it's an interesting subject. Yeah.
Okay. That's good enough for me. As long as you're here. Anyone else? Yes.
Maybe because we're always we say we're proud of our Islamic history or of our heritage or of the Prophet ﷺ, but I find that a lot of times we don't really know much about them.
Okay. Well, let me ask you. Most of us, if not born in America, most of you are born here. If not, you are studying here, obviously. Okay. What history do you know? As of right now, which history do you know the most well? Which history do you know?
American history.
American history.
Yeah.
As simple as that. The history that you know well and you identify with is American history. Now, what are the implications of? So, when we say American history, what type of history is that? It's a history based on a specific nation, culture, people. Okay, so it comes along with a package: ideologies, way of life, way of thinking. Okay, so for example, when you think about American history, there's an idea of democracy, there's an idea of progress, there's an idea of the West being more advanced than the Orient or the East. So these are some of the things that come along with understanding our history. So when you think about American history, you all automatically, in contrast, think of the other. Would you agree? When you think about American history, there is American history and then there's the other. Then, in American history, most of us know the American history, the master narrative. For your notes, what is a master narrative? It'll come up briefly, hopefully, inshallah. A master narrative is something that's repeated so often, it's repeated with so little variance, so little change, so confidently that it's taken as to be factual and true, without question. Think about something that the West or the world may impress upon Islam as a master narrative. That Islam oppresses women. Okay? That in a political realm is a master narrative. In a political realm, that's a master narrative. Now, why do you think master narratives are problematic? Or are they problematic?
Yes.
It is problematic. Why? I told you it's a tough sell, man. I mean, it's not easy to talk about history at 7 after your whole day has gone by. Okay? It's gonna be like only 2 desks next time I come by. Get this guy. Why do you think master narratives are problematic?
Because maybe it's usually written by the people in power.
Okay, written by the people in power. Okay.
It gets passed on and people just keep believing it and not questioning whether it's like true or not. Or
Okay.
actually happened.
Okay, that's good. So, just keep that in mind, master narrative. Who knows of Chris Hedges? Anybody heard of Chris Hedges? He's written a few books. One thing that he talks about is the danger of a people learning their own history and not the history of others. If you only learn your own history, most likely you're learning it from a golden age, the golden days, right? The golden days. There is a verse in Surah Al-Baqarah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the Jewish people of Medina. Now obviously as Muslims we have nothing against Jews in general, right? But there are certain historical events that the Quran narrates. So one aspect where the Quran says, لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ مُوسَى. Now in Arabic, لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ, kum is a direct address. It's a direct address to you. But Allah is addressing whom? Allah is addressing the Jewish community of Medina. Did Musa come to them? Allah is saying, verily Moses has come to you, or had come to you. لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ مُوسَى. What's the problem there with this verse? Musa didn't come to the people of Medina. Right? Musa didn't come to the people of Medina. And it says, لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ مُوسَى. Musa had come to you, and you had taken the calf to worship. Right? So the problem is that Musa didn't come to them. And these people themselves, they did not worship the calf. Maybe their forefathers at the time of Moses, as we know, worshiped the calf. But the question is, why is Allah addressing them? Because the Jewish people of Medina had a habit. When they talked about history, they only spoke about their golden days. We were like this, we were like this, we were like this. So Allah is reminding you that if you're going to be talking about history, be honest. You have good days, you had golden days, but you had also went through very dark days. Okay, moments and days that you're not very proud of. So the idea the Quran teaches us is that if you're going to tackle history, you're going to tackle history honestly. Okay? Not with a bias. If you really want to benefit from history, you have to be honest. So keeping that in mind, Chris Hedges says something very profound and alarming. So what are the implications of a people, especially a young generation? Think about how often we learn American history. When do you start learning about American history?
As soon as you step into school.
As soon as you step into school, arguably. Because everything is related, from the Pledge of Allegiance to everything else, right? So you start learning about American history, and when do you stop? You go into high school, then you're either taking Advanced World History or AP World History, and then you're taking British history, but it's still related to American history. So Chris Hedges argues that when a generation learns their own history, and usually history is only your own golden days. Yes? Has anyone here read about the dark days of America? I mean, we read about the Civil War, but it's embellished. It's painted in a very specific way. No? Yes? People are dead, man. Yes?
Yes. Yes.
No?
Yes.
Yes, it's embellished. It's colored. It's embellished. I could just talk to my wife if you guys want to know this. Ask her to come along. So it's embellished. It's embellished in a certain way. So if it's embellished and presented in a certain way, what are the possible implications? You may have a generation that grows up with a superiority complex. Yes? You may have a generation and a nation that has a superiority complex. What happens when a nation has a superiority complex? Well, it has a lot of problems. The greatest of which is that superiority complex can justify genocide if it means my protection. Do you understand that? Do you see the problem with only learning your own history? Because you take everyone else as the other. When you take everyone else as the other and you alienate the people's history and the world's and nations and ethnicities' contribution to the greater picture, you may have this. And yes, there are Muslims who have this. There are Muslims who have this. Almost every nation goes through this, but it's just the prevalent is Western history, the US, right now. So Chris Hedges argues this, and this is an alarming point. That's why a nation will stay silent at the invasion of a country where millions have died. Because it's on the premise of protecting us. Do you understand? A bit too heavy for this late? No? History is history, okay? So Chris Hedges argues this. That's just on my first slide before I started. So the question is, why study history? And I asked you this. So a common quote that you may or may not have read is or heard: history is not a study of the past, it's a study of the present in light of the past. Okay? It's a study of the present. How did you get here? So what are some benefits of studying history? Just what are some benefits, very quickly? Yes?
You can learn to not make the same mistakes again.
Okay. So you avoid the you study the past, you see the mistakes they've made, so therefore you avoid the same mistakes. Yes?
You get context for modern day events.
You get context, very important. Brothers, sisters in the back. Why study history? What benefit do you get? I don't have many listed, because I was going to ask you, you understand the present, and the main focus that I just spoke about was that you see through master narratives. Okay, you're able to see through master narratives. What are master narratives? Aspects of history repeated often and confidently with very little variance that they are taken as true and factual. Okay, that's a master narrative. So our goal is going to be an honest look. Okay, we're not going to be talking about the golden days of Islam. You know what? Without Islam, there would be no world today. Okay, that is a master narrative for some people in some places. You know. Like some people in some Muslim countries don't mind me saying random names like Egypt maybe or Bangladesh or Pakistan. They believe, there are certain groups, they believe like without Islam there's no world. Right? Then you question, well what about before Islam? Like before the Prophet, what happened before that? And what happened to those generations or those people? Okay. So what are some common ideas of history? When we think about history, what are some common ideas of history? Some common ideas are, there are many groups with many different ideas on what Islam's history looked like. The first and the most influential are the Orientalists. Orientalists are people, scholars of the West who study the Orient. Orient meaning the East. Okay? One of the greatest books written on this is by Edward Said. Okay, Edward Said. The Orient. And it's quite an academic book, and this became the premise and the basis for studying the Eastern studies. Okay? Because in that book, he tackled the biases that scholars have when they study the East. They start studying the East with a certain premises, certain biases, and that's not a neutral approach, right? So that's not a neutral. It's a very wonderful book, academic book. Okay, so what is the Orientalist approach? And what does the Orientalist approach say? They say, can everybody see that? Claim that there was a period of intelligence from about 800 to 1200 Common Era. So in these 400 years of Islam, what they call the golden age of Islam, there was progress, advancement, and they talk about how Islam took from the ancient people, and Islam took the knowledge of the Greeks and the Greeks specifically, and bettered it, advanced it, refined it, and then passed it forward to the world. Now, on a tangent, there are books, The Lost Islamic History, where the author argues that when we say Islam took from them, it does not mean that Islam came and copied verbatim, word for word, and then transferred. And when you're talking about science and knowledge, if you yourself don't have previous exposure to something, you can't just translate a text and comprehend that text. Does that make sense? Let's say you have no exposure to what trigonometry is or algebra is. Can you just open a book of algebra and understand it? It logically it's a logical fallacy. It doesn't make sense. So what am I trying to say? When we say that Islam took from them, it doesn't mean that Islam came and took everything from them. It means Muslims and the people they had prior to their coming in contact with the Greeks and the works of the Greeks and others, they had already developed sciences. They have already their own, right? So then they're able to take and understand, further refine, and pass forward for the rest of the world. So the Orientalists claim is that there was a period of intelligence. Then there are the neoconservatives. Okay. By the way, I'll make all the I appreciate you taking notes, and it kind of helps, right? However, I'll inshallah make all the slides available for your convenience, inshallah. So my goal today is going to be to build confidence. Okay. That's kind of my goal. Because if you think, okay, I'm just going to study Islamic history because I want to know more, let me tell you, there's a lot of things you know about Islamic history. But when somebody challenges it, when somebody challenges your set of ideas or beliefs, then we get shaken, right? And that's my main focus today, okay? So hopefully I'll get to that. So then you have the neoconservatives. They think that Islam has always been antithetical to the modern world. Islam has always been in contrast to the modern world, and that's all it is. Okay, so if you think about like the far right, what are they? The groups that support like neo-Nazis and all these people, right? What are they always talking about? Neoconservatives, right? This is the same thing that they echo over and over again, right? As Muslims are against Islam, they're trying to pass Sharia law, okay? They have these specific deltas that they throw out there in the media, and that's what they're promoting. Neoconservatives think that Islam has always been against the West. And like sometimes you see movies like "Death to the West, Death to the West." That's basically neoconservatives. Then you have the proto-science group, think that Muslims were superior in science and technology until they hit a glass ceiling in the 15th century. This is like the time of Al-Ghazali and others, after the time of Ghazali and others. Then you have the liberals think that Islamic values promoted many scientific advances that poured into Europe and are still of importance in the modern world. And then, of course, you have our brothers and sisters, the Muslim partisan group, who believes that Muslims created almost every aspect of modern science, medicine, technology, and social organization, but the attribution has not been given to us. We have been deprived of our right. This is the Muslim partisan group. Who is right? Who is right? Who is wrong? None of them are fully correct, but none of them are fully wrong either. Again, a neutral look at history. None of them are fully correct, nor can we say that all of them are completely wrong. Yes, we had our ups and downs. There was a time in Baghdad where we were superior. Baghdad and the Muslim world led, but then we did have a decline. Now we're also, right now we're seeing more progress within the Muslim world by the grace of Allah, right? So these are the common ideas, but the main thing to understand is that it's not a very monolithic picture. It's not that everybody's the same, or there's just one narrative that does justice to everything. Okay? This is my main focus today. Leveling the playing field. Okay? So the common narrative is that Muhammad was a desert Bedouin, who was illiterate, and he worshipped the moon god. We hear all these things, like these random crazy things, right? And for example, somebody may come to you and say, well, so and so, he's a pseudo historian. He wrote a book that Muhammad actually wasn't a person. He's just a pigmentation of the imagination. He's a pigment of imagination that you Muslims made up for, etc., etc. Let's say somebody throws that at you. You automatically go into defense mode, right? No? I would. I mean, hopefully I won't now, but very likely there would have been a time where I would have gone into defense mode. Like, oh my God, how do I prove him wrong? The amazing thing in the Quran is that there are certain places where the mushrikeen and others would come to the Prophet and ask him certain questions on a tangent. And they would ask certain questions. For example, they would say, what has changed these people from the Qibla they were facing to the Qibla they're facing now, from Baytul Maqdis, from Jerusalem to Mecca? What has changed your Qibla? Now you might, if it was me and you, and we might think like, oh man, we gotta logically defend this. The Quran says, قُلْ لِلَّهِ الْمَشْرِقُ وَالْمَغْرِبُ. فَأَيْنَمَا تُوَلُّوا, wherever, Allah says, the east and west belongs to Allah. Wherever you turn, you'll find Allah. What is the Quran doing? The Quran is teaching us that when somebody objects on you, or somebody asks you without any justification, questions you, or asks you to defend your position, don't fall into it. State the fact that you already believe in and let it be. Because as soon as you get defensive, you have already lost. If you believe and you have conviction that you're on the truth, why do you have to defend it in a defensive mode? Why not in an offense? That you know this is the truth, and I'm stating it. So when Allah says, in answering to the people who are saying, what turned them and changed their qibla? Allah says, قُلْ لِلَّهِ الْمَشْرِقُ وَالْمَغْرِبُ. You don't have to play their game. State the fact that you already believe in, and leave it. But sometimes we fall into that trap where we feel like we have to defend ourselves. And the reason we kind of fall into that is because we may think that their approach to history is superior than our approach to history, although we actually don't know what their approach is, nor do we know our own approach. Okay? We don't know. Does anybody know? Anybody history major here? See? Ya Allah. I have a few students and I'm always urging them, like, one is taking history as a minor. Alhamdulillah, I guess that's some sort of success. Right? Everybody's going into computer science. La ilaha illallah. I'm at tech, right?
Yes, sir.
That's great. Alhamdulillah. I have my own personal opinions, but it's good. Alhamdulillah. Allah bless all of you. But we do level the playing field, again, going back to when you are questioned without any justification. You don't need to spring into defense mode to defend yourself. Like the Quran says in multiple places where the mushrikeen would come and pose a question, the Quran says, you know what, this is what we believe, and the Prophet ﷺ is told to back off. Leave it. Leave it, because that's a fact. Turning to Jerusalem, Baytul Maqdis, or the Kaaba, they both belong to Allah. The main thing is not turning to a specific direction. The main thing is obedience to the command of Allah. That's where the obedience, ubudiyya, comes in. Servitude comes in. You're stuck on which way, right? So the Quran says, don't fall into that. قُلْ لِلَّهِ الْمَشْرِقُ وَالْمَغْرِبُ. So how do we level the playing field? Well, as I mentioned, When you think about Western scholars and Western academia, when I say Western scholars, I'm just talking about general approach. Today it's not necessarily Western, it's just a general approach to history, okay? It's just a general approach to history. So they generally approach history and view reports about the past and reports about history of religions and scriptures in particular. It's not neutral. It's not neutral. That's the main thing you have to remember. So they come with premeditated mind, predispositions, right? So they approach with biases, already existing biases. It is the product of specific culture and a political tradition. Okay? Though this method prides itself on shedding light on the dark recesses of all human past, it has its own blind spots. And that's what I'm going to be going into, inshallah. So I highlighted the main points that you need to remember. It's not neutral. It's a result of their own cultural, political traditions and pasts. And although it advocates and claims that it's shedding light on the rest of history and bringing to light the dark annals of history, it in itself has blind spots. So what are some of the blind spots? How do we understand what this approach is? So this approach commonly is known as the historical critical method, HCM. So this is another terminology that we should keep in mind. Historical critical method. Okay? What is a historical critical method? It's a set of it's assumptions and tools which are product of their own past, of a people's own past. Okay? A product of Western Europe. So Western European, meaning Anglo-Saxon, Western European Christian tradition from the Renaissance and onwards. Now, to kind of give you an idea, I mean, no one is born looking at history through the historical critical method. If a child is born today, it doesn't say like, I'm gonna look at the world through the historical critical method and see if everything is truly justified. Well, why do I say that? If it's a set of assumptions and tools, that means it's a matter of what we call of personal judgment or a set of judgment based on your own political, economical, social history. Okay? So it's a method. It's not, come on, help me out. It's not the method. Okay? So we're trying to level the playing field. So the HCM, historical critical method, is a method. It's the most prevalent and most utilized in academia, but it's still a method. It's not the method. Because Muslims, we have our own method. Okay, we have our own method that we believe in. And because it's something we believe in, we don't have to justify it just because somebody objects to it. I know that's a plain statement, but I'll validate it by the grace of Allah with His help. So when you think about the historical critical method, there is an assumption that this is the only way, and people must think about history in this way. This is the problem with historical critical method. This is the problem when the West tries to impose on the rest of the world how their history should be and what it was. Not what you think as Muslims, but what we will tell you what it was. So do you kind of understand now what the problem with the historical critical method is? Okay. Now what are some principles and methods that they use? Like I said, it's a set of assumptions which are principles. So these assumptions are kind of principles that they have built up, which then lead to methods. So what are some principles and methods that they have? So the first one is the principle of analogy. Okay? I told you this is a tough sale, man. This is A lot of, you know, is it difficult for you guys? No? Okay, thank you so much for your kindness. I was gonna be like, oh. I'm just hoping like nobody falls asleep. You guys are doing good so far. So, when you're looking at principles and methods, one principle is the principle of analogy. What is the principle of analogy? The principle of analogy believes, assumes, that people in all age, all time, all place are the same. They're greedy, they're envious, they abuse power, they are covetous of evil, and all of this. So it's this cyclical idea of history, that history is repetitive and people's nature are repetitive, right? And it's a very negative, almost cynical look at history. This assumption, the premise of this, it's almost a cynical look at history. That, you know, people by nature crave evil, by nature deviate, by nature distort, corrupt, covet power, abuse power, greedy, malicious. That's what people are. Okay? So that's the principle of analogy. Now, if you think about it, what conflict does it have with Islam? The Muslim view that the Prophet's generation was the best generation. Can you criticize the Sahaba as Muslims? The Sunni tradition, let me go on a tangent. Okay, I'm going to go on these tangents to give you why. Well, hopefully you understand why. Let me justify my tangents. Within the Sunni tradition, when you talk about theology, especially because the 10th of Muharram just went, okay? So when you think about theology, there have been major differences within the Sunni school, within the Sunni realm. Differences with regards to how we understand the divine attributes of Allah. These are from early days, how we understand the divine attributes of Allah. How we think about predestination, taqdeer, and other, creedal and theological matters. Within the Sunni sect, there have been many schisms in these specific issues. There's one issue, arguably, that all Sunnis unanimously agree on. Only one. Guess what that is? Take a guess.
Criticizing the Sahaba?
As-sahabatu kulluhum adul. All of the Sahaba, they're free from criticism. They're all righteous. That's one aspect that we all agree on. All Sunnis. Okay? On a tangent. So, why did I say that? Because of the idea of the generations. The Prophet, our belief as Muslims is that the Prophet he said, the best generation is my generation, ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ. Right? So the Sahaba, the time of the Prophet, the Sahaba, the Tabi'een and the Tabu Tabi'een, the predecessors and the predecessors of the predecessors of the Sahaba, of the Tabi'een. Okay? So my point is that, can someone come and say, well, because of the principle of analogy, the Muslims, your approach to not criticizing these companions is wrong? Can they tell you that? Come on, people. Well, let's say I'm telling you that. How do you defend yourself? Well, that's just an assumption. And you have the right to hold an assumption, but this is my belief. Yes.
But didn't certain Sahaba criticize one another in certain instances, and the Prophet might have criticized them too over certain actions? So that means
they had their own differences. They had their own differences. But we, the general Muslim Ummah, we have agreed that we do not criticize. We could say, Ali radiallahu anhu, his judgment here may have been this, or Muawiyah, his judgment may have been this, but we cannot put them at fault. That's Sunni position. But nevertheless, going back to the point, when we say that we don't have to, because that's the principle of analogy is an assumption. Okay? An hour is also an assumption, but it's a belief also. It's a creedal matter. It's a creedal matter based on which our fiqh, our law, our jurisprudence, our theology exist. Okay? Because if you question the Sahaba, these people who gave their life, gave everything that they had for the deen, without asking anything back. If you question them, then you would, by default, inevitably question what? The faith itself. Okay? So just understand that there are conflicts. And we don't have to defend ourselves with regards to saying, well, the principle analogy is right, because it's not right. We do know that there were ages, there were people, there were certain time and era where people were very well. They had moral obligations. They believed in certain aspects of life, which, at other times declined. A second principle is the principle of anachronism, things that appear to be out of place in time. So what that is that, when they look at history, they say that if they see something out of place, they'll say, well, because this is out of place, this must have been false. For example, let's just say if Jesus, in a narration to his Hawariyin, to his companions, he talked to them about cell phones. Okay, he said there's going to be an iPhone, it's going to do great. Okay, Apple's going to break the market. Okay, so now these historical critical methods, these historians would come and say, this is a problem. This is a problem because there were no iPhones in his time, so this is out of place. So this means this must have been false. It does make sense, doesn't it? But what is the conflict there with us? The Prophet ﷺ was given certain knowledge of events, of the past, which people didn't know of the future, which people didn't know of. There are hadiths that talk about, for example, there are hadiths that have chains, narration chains, that go back to his time. Obviously, it's a hadith. And they have multiple reports, multiple chains, with tens and hundreds of people reporting them over the last 1400 years. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said that when the hour, the shadow of the hour will be close upon you when you see that there are holes within the mountains of Mecca. قَدْ أَضَلَّتِ السَّاعَةِ The sa'a, what is the common translation of sa'a? A watch, a clock. And this is what the Prophet said. قَدْ أَضَلَّتْ السَّاعَةِ Literal translation, verily the clock has cast its shadow. Now, if you take it literally, subhanallah, it still holds because there's a clock tower. Okay? And if you look at the second part, the Prophet ﷺ talked about that there will be holes in the mountains of Mecca. Majority of the roads in Mecca go through what? Tunnel through mountains. That's one aspect. Or for example, if the Prophet ﷺ talked about when he was descending from Mi'raj, our belief that when the Sahaba asked him about Mi'raj, he said, when I came down to the first heaven, it was like a cloud of dust. Now the common understanding of the Milky Way is what? Do you get my point? So there are certain aspects that were beyond human comprehension. And this is established from his time. I'm just mentioning one or two, but there's many more narrations of the Prophet narrating things that are beyond. So this is why we have a problem with this. We have a problem with the principle of anachronism because it doesn't fit out. It doesn't fit us. Okay? Okay. Continue on. There's a principle of dissimilarity. If something appears in a text that goes against the writer's interest, it's probably accurate. Okay, so these are biases that they have. So if you know, if the writer of that, you know, people or religion, if they write something against themselves, that's probably accurate, because why else would they do it? Right? So that's the principle of dissimilarity. The principle of verisimilitude says that the idea that details are provided in a narration to mislead people into believing it. If someone is providing you a detail, like if I tell you I went that day over there and you know what, it was a beautiful day, the sky was blue. I wanted to tell you that I wanted to go see my friend, but before I tell you the main point, I go into all of this. But I saw an ice cream truck. Oh my God, it was really loud, you know, and it had all these crazy stickers. But you know what? They had this crazy ice cream that I tasted. That's extra. So their thing is that, you know, a principle that they have of verisimilitude is that the idea that when the authors or the people are providing extra details, it's a sign that they're trying to make you believe it. Now, again, these are what? Assumptions. These are all assumptions. Okay. Now, when you think about, so these are some of the main ones. When you think about all these principles combined, they form some overall approaches and themes to history. Okay? So what are some of those themes? One is default skepticism. What is default skepticism? Default skepticism is that, so keep those principles in mind, combined, they give you certain methods. One method is default skepticism. So default skepticism is that when you're talking about the past, you have to be skeptical. You can never take the past at face value. Assumption. It's based on an assumption, right? So what conflict does it have with us? We believe in the Quran as it is. We believe in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. We don't question authentic hadith. We don't question the Quran, right? There are certain aspects of the life of the Prophet we do not question. Okay? So that's one, default skepticism. Another one is suspicion of orthodox narrative. Suspicion of orthodox narratives basically states that the belief that orthodox accounts of religious origins are probably not true and should and must be doubted. So if there's an orthodox narrative of religion, you have to doubt it. If the orthodoxy is saying something, you have to doubt it. Where do you think this specific one comes from? Orthodoxy, religious orthodoxy. Where does this specific one come from? From the West, and it's dealing with Christianity. Okay? The West and how it dealt with Christianity. So it's again, remember I said it's a Western, Christian, Anglo-Saxon, European, method. Very Eurocentric. So suspicion of orthodox narrative. So this is again, an outcome exists because Western scholars discovered this about Christianity. And the last one is scholarly investigation can uncover the true history. So this is the belief that applying these previous methods and principles, we can uncover the truth of the past. And if we cannot, then at least we know one thing for sure, you're still wrong. You get the point? If we fail to do so, we know one thing for sure, you're still wrong. So your orthodox narrative is not right. You Muslims, you're not right. Okay? So again, that's a approach that they have and a theme that they use. Scholarly investigation can uncover the true history. That's it. That's it. No, well, it's it for the presentation. I'm going to do a case study. Okay? You guys ready? The case study is going to be of the Quran. Okay? When you think about knowledge, what is the most common form of knowledge?
Literature.
Written? You'd say written, right? What else? Okay. Which one is stronger, in your view? Somebody says there's a God. and somebody says, so and so is my mother. Which one logically is a stronger argument?
Second one.
Mother one? Very good. What do you think, Ron? What do you think? Second one? My wife says second one also. Which is sad. It's the first one. Maybe I say, how is that? Come on. I know my mother is my mother. If I say, give me empirical proof, if you want to talk, give me empirical proof that she's your mother, how are you going to do it? Were you there when you were born? Well, you were there, but you get my question. Did you witness your birth? So you might say what? Ridiculous. I have a birth certificate. Did you write that birth certificate? Ridiculous. I have pictures. This is not empirical proof. What is empirical proof?
Yes.
Something that you did know, experience. That's empirical proof. You cannot empirically prove that that's your mother. So, by default, what do you rely on? You rely on the strongest form and the most common form of knowledge. It's called testimonial evidence. Testimonial evidence. So now think about it. What is testimonial evidence?
People testifying.
Come on, people, just define the words in your head and look up a definition.
Someone testifying that.
It's depending and relying on other people's words. So now think about it. Now if I ask you, I believe in God, there is a God, and this is my mother. Which one is stronger? That there's a God. It holds more testimonial evidence in the world, historically, than today. You trying to prove your mother. Just the sheer number of people that believe in God. Right? It holds more value than your statement of this is my mother. Okay? So keeping in mind, well, some people say, well, I can give you DNA that she's my mother. Because that's also a common answer. I show you. Did you discover what DNA is? You say no, but I've learned about it in school. So, well, you learned about it. So it's still what? Testimonial evidence. You can't escape testimonial evidence. So far, everything that you learned about whatever major you're in is what? Based on testimonial evidence. You can't say, I read the book. Testimonial evidence. I listened to a lecture. Testimonial evidence. Everything in life is testimonial evidence. So once we establish that one of the most common and strongest form of knowledge, to ascertain knowledge, is testimonial evidence, by the grace of Allah, it solves a lot of our problems. And it gives us confidence by His grace. So we can stop now. It's time for Maghrib. Or we can continue.
Let's take like a little.
So